So I'm Kathryn Ricketts. I work in the Faculty of Education. My practice is dance, and I teach will-be teachers how to use movement in the classroom. But I do still perform, and so I decided today that I would present on my four characters: Hal, Rufus, Lug, and Remington. And these are characters that I have been working with. Well, it says a 10-year journey, but I've been working with Lug for over 20 years. And these are improvisational characters that are a catalyst for conversation and community building. So I'm going to kind of really fast and dirty go through the ancestry of my practice and then a little bit about those characters. So I have a research lab called the Listening Lab, basically because my work is really about deep listening, as it seems Kathryn's is as well. And so any of the work that I do filters through that. I started in dance being very concerned with being virtuosic and a beautiful dancer. I'd come off stage wanting people to say, "What, you're a beautiful dancer." I didn't care about the content. And that was my starting point. And then you'll see that I started to shift from there. I started to work a little bit with unpredictable contexts and conditions. So these are bags of sand that I had to do something very tricky and balance work on it. So the bags of sand were sort of my living partners, and I never knew how they were going to shift and how I would have to work to keep my balance in the dance. So that they were covered. The whole stage was covered with them. So I liked that. I liked the tension and attention, the immediacy, the urgency that brought to my dancing. And even though it wasn't improvised, it was choreographed, there was an element of improvisation in dialoguing with that context and condition. I started working with non-dancers and difficult stories. I was drawn to stories that have somewhat been suppressed or silenced, and sometimes those stories are celebratory and sometimes they're full of sorrow. And I really loved moving into that kind of intensity around narrative and movement. Started working outside of the black box theater and into warehouses with dirt and sand, back alleys, moving buses, warehouses. You'll see some of the images later with that. And again, context and conditions. So I would move into a space with my company at that time and find out what we could use, what window ledges, what kind of lighting, all of that was naturally there. I also began to integrate politic into my work. So here is a piece called Organs that explored gender diversity, gender fluidity. And this again is also from that. But the important thing to point out is that these props that are on the men's head are china teacups that are not glued, not attached. And the audience knew that if the cups fell and smashed, that we had volunteers ready and poised to sweep them up, and the performance would continue. So this brought a certain kind of tension and attention not only to the performers but to the audience as well. And I began to really move into that idea of how can I create performance that is engaging the audience on a real visceral level. Working with design, so you can see the couch, the lamp, and the costumes are all that 1950s, 1960s curtain material. Working with dancers and actors, again, a difficult story, as you can maybe see there. All of my characters have a little bit of clowning in them, but not like ha-ha, honk-honk clowning, but more Chaplin-esque, sort of a sweet, sorrowful clown. So this is a very tall man in a very short chair eating a bowl of cereal to the pomp and circumstance. Using props a lot. This is cornstarch that was in the pocket of this person, and when she pulled it out, she threw it as if it was an empowerment of voice. So using a lot of props as metaphors. Moving into working with elders, and here is someone who's working with an overcoat and telling a story that's quite full of anger. Another working with an elder. not easy stories, and I'm certainly not a therapist, but I'm there to hold a space when people want to tell a story that needs to be told. So this was a pivotal point for me. This is Jorge Holguin, who was dying of AIDS, and he and I were really, really close in our younger generative period of making art. We collaborated together. We were sort of inside each other's imagination. He moved to Denmark and then became HIV positive and asked me to come. So because he couldn't finish a show that he had started. His body was deeply in decline. So he sat at the studio against the mirror looking pretty gray with a blanket around him. I stood in front of him, and the dancers of his company were standing in front of me. And he would give me metaphors and words, expressions, and I would dance them. And then the dancers would in turn interpret what I was doing. So I became what I considered to be a kind of a kinesthetic conduit for the stories of this person. And so when I started this talk, I said I wanted to be a beautiful dancer. I wanted to be recognized for that. I was full of myself when I came off the stage. What did you think of me? And this was the first time that I got myself out of my own way and became a voice for others. And so this is really important as a pivotal point for talking about my four characters. So not only were our props really important, the unpredictable context and conditions, and then this idea of being a conduit for other people's stories. And then lastly, another pivotal moment was I was working with a counselor who was also an arts-based researcher in my master's work, and we were trying to figure out how to, create some kinds of methods and systems around narratives and movement and theater. And he had a hockey stick in his hand, and I'm going to read the story. I work with a counselor, theater director, who is also interested in exploring unconventional ways of developing script. He has brought a hockey stick as an emblem of self within a particular period in his life. He begins his remembered story holding the stick with ease, an extension of his body. He sweeps around with imaginary slap shots on goal, and with power and control he speaks of his father. He tells me what he knows, but I'm not interested in the telling of what is known, but rather exploring the space where discovery lives. I ask him to work with the stick using any part of his body but his hands. The signifier becomes fractured. He begins to work with the properties of the stick: texture, weight, pliability, and dimensions. The stick brings another movement to his body and tone to his voice. I begin to hear another side of the same story. What was once power and control gets mixed up in the navigation of this object through time and space. So that was a really important moment for me to understand that when we work off of axis, we disrupt our habituated ways of knowing. And this is, of course, integral to my work with dance and with my own character performances, and then me creating on community groups. And I should say that I primarily work with community groups that are have challenges or feel disenfranchised, i.e. Elders, youth at risks, mixed abilities, and newcomers. So when I ask them to work with a prop, but work asymmetrically and come off of their balance and tell a story, then often what will happen is that we take them off guard, so they actually tell another kind of story, a more truthful story. So it is my belief that in our body we have pockets of memory and stories that sometimes are not accessed because we have a certain sense of control. I really remember reading my dad's eulogy, and I was at a podium so nobody could see this, but I stood on one leg through the whole thing, and that allowed me to not only focus on something other than my nerves, but would allow some more authentic comments to come in other than what I had scripted. So this is my methodology called embodied poetic narrative, and this is what came out of my PhD work. I work with objects, I work with the body, and I work with story. And I can start with any one of those and then move it in through the realm of that arena. I can start with a story and then assign an object as an emblem to that. And then I can move, or I can start with a movement and then tell a story and then find an emblematic object. So you get the idea that they're a trilogy, but they're not necessarily in any prescribed order. Here are some of the folks that informed me in my thinking throughout my PhD work. A lot of embodied inquiry, narrative inquiry, artography, performative inquiry, and then, of course, enabling constraints, which I've been talking about in terms of the limitations and the dictations with unpredictable contexts and conditions. So here are the 4 characters. This is Lug, the very first character. And I'll read a quick story there with this one. This is my very first one that was invented over 20 years ago. It was my final project for my first graduate seminar here at UBC. I had donned my overcoat and hat for the inaugural performance of what later became the Lug series. I was clutching my leather suitcase with one hand, and with the other, I was gathering the letters I had asked my classmates to write, a greeting or farewell from or to a loved one. I sat in the stall of the washroom down the hall, reading through each of them, hoping one would be the obvious choice for my improvisation. Unfortunately, they were all good. And then I found the letter, a small note of forgiveness from a late father to his son who identified as gay. I tucked it into my suitcase and returned to the class. It became the source of my improvisation as I moved through kinesthetic, dramatic metaphors of estrangement, isolation, longing, compassion, regret, and finally atonement. At one point in the improvisation, I read the letter silently as a flood of emotions entered my body. When I had finished the performance, a room full of emotional students all claimed they were absolutely sure I had read their letter. So this is a situation where I realized that if I took the specificity of a story and pared it down to the essence of a story, then it could become everybody's story. And so this was a really important factor for me in terms of my characters. And I wear more or less the same costume, an overcoat, a hat, a suitcase. Often the suitcase will have a prop in it that is revealing something. And I don't know if we'll have time, but this slideshow has hyperlinks with films of all of these characters. That suitcase had an onion. Often they'll have artifacts that I think might be powerful provocations, like an antique book, a handkerchief, an onion, a small heart. So this lug is with a full-length overcoat, felt hat, and weighted aged leather suitcases. The character dances stories of arrivals and departures and the liminal spaces between. Lug surfaces stories of belonging and isolation and is often performing for and with communities who are feeling displaced or silenced, either culturally, geographically, or emotionally. And this is Remington, the second character, who is an anthropomorphized bird inhabiting a austere prairie-soaked landscape of sound and video, provoking important conversations around identity, land, place, migration, and belonging. This character has become a call to action in relation to our treatment and responses to the natural world, and especially to our treated land here in Saskatchewan. So all these characters are improvised, and they're improvised based on stories or context, the people that I'm performing for, and they always have talkbacks and conversations. Rufus is the third and most recent, or not the most recent, the third character, a tired clown in a three-piece suit, calling attention to the natality in dissonance and error. Rufus reminds us not only of the value, but the necessity of failure and risk-taking. And then the last character, which I will end with, is Hal. Hal sports a beige Fortrell jacket embellished with brown braid and boasting a hand embroidered emblem claiming his claiming him as a Regina exhibition dignitary. This is accompanied with a hat blazoned with a bronze bull. He is amplified by a terrible crackling sound system and a corded mic delivering a range of eulogies in the form of an auctioneer. Going once, going twice, gone. Hal disrupts the expected content from an auctioneer and instead creates a tender attention and tension in tribute to lives lived. Eulogies often sum up a person's life in the most quantifiable and comparative way. I liken it to auctioneers outlining the qualities and traits of their livestock in a highly competitive market. Even when laid to rest, we fall into the tropes of must do better. Through a range of dance, theater, and vocal improvisations, Hal finds the heart in eulogies that journey from this quantitative summary to what really matters about this person who's remembered. Yes, and I think I'm probably at time. Am I right, Tara? Yes. I mean, if there are no questions, I can show a small clip, but I would prefer to have any questions or comments. And then
we got a few minutes, so yeah, if there's any questions, feel free to write in the chat or listen. Yeah.
Hi, Kathryn. I'm Jenna Ives. I work for the Vice President of Research as a Research Engagement Manager. And hearing about Remington, I was wondering, have you ever done a territory acknowledgement through Remington, through that character?
That is such a beautiful idea. Oh my gosh. Because I'm one of those people that really push back against the kind of formulaic land acknowledgements. And I always, when I do them, I always try to bring my heart to my throat. That's sort of you're doing it right if you feel like your heart is in your throat. So they're always a little bit different, but that is such a great idea. I would love to do that and think about that.
Okay. Yeah, I thought maybe you already had because you mentioned the connection to land and then seeing the pictures. I was like, I bet she's already done it, but I'll reach out to you.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, Remington has done a full-length show called Landing, and I would say the whole piece, I work with a sound engineer and a visual film person, and we were out in the grasslands capturing a lot, as you could see, a lot of the footage. And then we had several residencies to put this all together. And I would say the whole thing is kind of like a land acknowledgement, really, because it just draws attention to stewardship of land and our responsibility to it.
What did you say that name was? The show?
Landing. Yeah, and in the slides, there's a hyperlink to a small excerpt from it.